Hello and welcome to this Astranti financial training video strategic analysis for the operational case study November 2016 and our sample company Marici Power. My name's Alex Phipps-Morgan, I'm one of the case study analysts at Astranti, and I've been looking at a range of case studies from operational right through to strategic level, and as such I've got a wealth of experience that I'm hoping to pass on to you during the course of this video, along with lots of great information about the solar industry as a whole to make sure that you maximise the marks that you receive during the exam. Now, as I say, the reason I'm here is to help you pass your exam, so before we go any further, it's worth just talking about the mixture of practical and theoretical knowledge that you'll need during the exam. Although during this strategic analysis we're going to very much focus on a number of models that you can use to help analyse the strategies of Marici Power, it's important to also realise that from previous examiners' commentaries they really want you to bring in plenty of practical knowledge about the industry and about this particular company in order to help you to do that. As such, when we discuss each of these models, you may want to think about the company, think about what it means in terms of the way forwards for the company, and indeed refer back to the pre-scene to give you increased guidance regarding the industry as a whole. So with that in mind, let's have a quick discussion about the case. Now this case focuses on the solar industry and our sample company Marici Power. Obviously you may not be very familiar with the solar industry, which is perfectly understandable, although I'm hoping that will be less the case at the end of this video. Now, whilst we can see that Marici are a long-standing solar manufacturer, what we can actually say is that they've struggled financially in recent years, making heavy losses in 2014 and only a modest profit in 2015. What we can also say from the pre-scene is that the solar industry within Freeland is going to struggle due to subsidy cuts in upcoming years. As we move on to strategically analyse Marici Power, we're also going to think about the ways in which solar power interacts with other sources of energy, such as the conventional ones of coal, oil and gas, as well as competing forms of renewable energy, such as wind. So let's now take a look at what we're going to do during this strategic analysis. As we can see, we're going to focus on the now of the company, thinking about how it transitions from the present and the circumstances currently affecting it towards its future missions and objectives. In fact, the future missions and objectives is mainly going to be informed by what we know about the company, about its governance and ethics, such as the fact it's entirely owned by Wallace Solar, the stakeholder mapping of the company, looking at everyone with an interest in the company, be that they're one large supplier of polysilicon or their range of customers, as well as thinking about the critical success factors. That is, what is it about Marici Power that's enabled them to stay in business for 20 years and what makes them successful? Having looked at all of those things, we'll have a really good idea of what the company aims to accomplish ultimately. We can then think about what's happening now, what factors are affecting the solar industry as a whole, as well as specifically to Marici Power, for example, changes to the Marici solar market, changes in price of oil, coal or gas, or changing efficiencies in the technology behind solar. And having done that, we can then finally think about that business strategy, and that is our vehicle for travelling between those factors affecting the company now and that promised land, if you will, of the future mission and objectives. In doing that, we're going to discuss a variety of models, including a balanced scorecard model, Mendelow's matrix, pestle analysis, the marketing mix, and the value chain. Having done so, we'll be in an excellent position to think about what should be that business strategy that Marici Power should use in order to fulfill its mission and objectives. So, we're going to start in the future, as it were, by looking at the missions and objectives of Marici Power. What we're doing here is looking that we fully understand where the organisation is heading, and that's by understanding its mission as well as any other objectives we are given during the pre-scene. We can see the range of techniques we're going to use to do that, discussing governance and ethics, stakeholder mapping, and that's going to be using Mendelow's matrix, and thinking about those critical success factors. One of the key ways we're going to add value during this process is to not only think about Marici, but think about the industry as a whole. And what we're going to move on to now is thinking about, essentially, what's a mission? So, as we can see, thinking about what a mission is all about answering this first question. What is the organisation all about? In the case of Marici Power, we know it's all about producing solar energy. Marici Power produce not only solar panels, but complete solar systems, and as such they look to supply all the solar requirements for domestic and commercial installations. As such, if thinking about who does the organisation exist for, we could be tempted to argue that it's both homeowners and business owners who want to install solar panels as a way of reducing their overall energy bills. However, given that fossil fuels are both finite and the source of a great deal of pollution, it could be argued that the solar energy industry as a whole, and therefore also Marici Power, also exist for the general benefit of mankind as we transition away from a finite source of energy and also look to be more environmentally conscious. With regards to thinking about what Marici want to achieve, we obviously therefore know that they want us all to be more environmental, they want more people to be using solar energy, and they want solar energy to be efficient and effective. However, what we shouldn't lose track of is that they are still a profit-seeking company, and as such, the number one requirement for Marici Power is to be profitable and to increase the wealth of their shareholders. Indeed, given that the company is entirely owned by Walla Solar, one of the things we could potentially say is that they are actually trying to increase the wealth of shareholders in Walla Solar. So then we come to the mission itself, and as we can see, this helps to provide common purpose and a focus for the organisation's strategy. This means when we're doing a strategic analysis, a mission is important when thinking about what guides the organisation's strategic thinking. Indeed, it could be argued that an organisation without a strong mission may lack focus, may pursue a number of different strategic ideas, and that means that the overall strategic direction may be confused. So, when we think about missions, we can draw on the work of two corporate theorists, Campbell and Youngs, who created this Ashbridge mission model in which Campbell sets out all the key elements of a good mission statement. So what we can do now is think about each of these with regards to Marici Power, and that'll give us a really good idea of the overall mission of the company and therefore a good idea of the overall strategic direction. First of all, why does the organisation exist and for whom does it exist? We touched on this above, but Marici Power manufactures solar panels and solar power systems within Freeland, and they do this for commercial and domestic customers. As such, they exist to produce solar power, and they do this for domestic and commercial customers within Freeland. In thinking about what the company wants to achieve in the long term, a large degree of this will be determined by the decisions made by the parent company, Walla Solar. For example, we saw that the company is very restricted by its geographic restraints, being 85% dependent on its income from Freeland, whilst to a greater or lesser extent the real boom markets for the solar industry are Japan, China and the USA. So we could say that the company wants to expand internationally in the long term, but it's possible that the parent company, Walla Solar, which already exists globally, foresees Marici Power existing within Freeland or within Europe. A more realistic long-term aim would be to continue to be profitable, to continue to expand, and to continue to increase the number of people who are using solar as the way of sourcing their energy. As an interesting aside, both of these things are really achievable, with solar power coming more and more to the fore as fossil fuels run out, and also with countries such as the UK starting to use it greater amount. This can be seen in the fact that in 2016 the UK produced more energy from solar sources than from coal. So the next thing we need to move on is strategy. After all, this is a strategic analysis, and we're thinking about what the organisation does. So we're thinking about how will it compete, and also the range of businesses that it has to compete with. So, as we've already noted, as a solar manufacturer, Marici Power is competing with a number of other solar manufacturers. For example, all of the world's largest 5 are in China. It's also competing with a range of renewable energies, including tidal and wind, to name but 2, and also competing with conventional energy companies and their use of fossil fuels as a source of energy. Thinking about how the company competes is not necessarily an easy or two-dimensional question, but when we think about energy as a whole, we know we want to get as much energy as possible from what we're doing, which means it needs to be as efficient as possible, and that also means it needs to be affordable. For example, if we think about it on a national scale for a moment, a country doesn't want to be spending lots of money to get a little bit of energy when they could be spending a little bit of money to get lots of energy. This is equally true of the domestic and commercial customers which Marici Power is focusing on, meaning that the company needs to compete by making its solar panels as efficient as possible and also as affordable as possible. This theme of price and efficiency is something we're going to come back to again and again. For example, whilst most solar panels are generally around 20-25% efficient, one of the world's leading panels is the Insulite, invented in Switzerland, which is proven to be 36% efficient. This is really interesting because that development brings solar power into contention with things such as coal-fired power stations, which are generally considered to be approximately 33% efficient. This idea of using affordability and efficiency as a way to compete leads us really nicely onto values. And I can actually quote directly from the pre-scene here, in that the company wants to continue to develop our brands and our reputation as a developer of high quality panels with high conversion efficiency. As such, we can say that this as a company stands for high conversion efficiency, which is essentially high quality, and given that this is a developing market and efficiency constantly improves, standing for efficiency and high quality also means having a passion for innovation. As an interesting aside, we know that this has previously been reasonably successful for Marici because they are the largest solar panel manufacturer in Freeland. So when we're thinking about ways in which the company are going to compete, we can say that there is a halo effect of that size, of that prestige of being the largest manufacturer in Freeland, naturally drawing people to their brand, which, as we've said, is also 20 years old, making it a very established name within the solar industry. Finally, we can move on to thinking about the policies the company are going to be pursuing. Now, in this way, we're already starting to think about that future and thinking about the strategic direction we're going to use to get there. Whilst answering this particular query is going to need us to complete this analysis and look at all of the different models that we're going to, what we can say for now is that if we're concentrating on improving the efficiency and improving the quality of our panels whilst also managing affordability, we know that we're going to want to keep costs low, to therefore keep the price for customers low, and also to continue to innovate in order to get that efficiency as high as possible, meaning that there's going to be a requirement for a high research and development budget. And so we can see that without actually undertaking any strategic analysis of any real depth, just using our understanding of the company, we've already got a really good idea of its mission. We can therefore move on to think about the specific objectives of the company and how those are going to be measured. As you may know, when we're thinking about objectives, one of the things we use to measure these are KPIs, key performance indicators, so we're going to be thinking about what key performance indicators the company may have in. The reason these KPIs are important is because they measure objectives which in turn provide a focused target to move towards in planning, and that motivates staff and also enables the company to accurately measure performance. After all, we want to know whether Marici Power are succeeding or if they're not. We can see that there are specific targets in the case study, one of which is maintaining the company's position as the largest solar power manufacturer in Freeland. If we were thinking about suitable KPIs for that particular specific target, we could say that we could measure the market share of the company and try and make sure that it maintained that particular percentage level. However, this is relatively vague, and so we know that the company are likely to have more specific strategic targets in terms of getting a more accurate focus on particular things they want to achieve. If the unseen material that were given during the exam suggests that this were not the case, this is a weakness in the company's planning approach. After all, if we take our example of wanting to be the largest solar manufacturer in Freeland, we need to have smaller KPIs moving towards this larger one. For example, we may say that we want to sell X number of one product and Y number of another, and these sales targets would lead towards a maintenance of market position. So we're going to be looking towards more specific targets being given to us. If we're thinking about the specific objectives and strategies the company may want to put in place, the balanced scorecard model could also be a really useful tool. This strategy performance management tool looks at 4 different perspectives in order to get an overall impression of the company's strategy and not simply a financial one. So by looking at the financial perspective, the customer perspective, internal process perspective and learning and growth perspective, we'd hope to get a more well-rounded impression of Marici as a company. That said, there's little evidence of this non-financial approach being taken during the pre-scene. For example, although Marici Power are a solar company, and we may therefore expect them to have really good environmental credentials, what we actually see during the pre-scene, there's little emphasis on this. There are no specific recycling targets, for example, and so this could be one area in which they improve their non-financial objectives. However, one of the things that may be asked is whether this is critical to the financial performance of the company. After all, ultimately we're going to be thinking about what needs to be done in order to make that company successful. These factors that are absolutely essential to success are known as critical success factors. So for example, if we were discussing why Marici Power was so successful in Freeland, we could say that the brand has been long established and long trusted within this country, and so brand reputation could be a critical success factor of the company. That said, a critical success factor may not actually currently be a success for the company. For example, it may be that Marici's panels are currently not efficient. They're not efficient enough to compete with other companies, despite this being a critical success factor for any solar manufacturer. As such, it is critical that all of these CSFs are developed and improved so that we know that they're a strength of the business and that therefore the business is going to have the best chance of being successful. Once we correctly identify these CSFs, we can use them as a framework against which to measure any possible strategies that are recommended during the unseen. For example, if the unseen says that there's a really profitable way to make cheap solar panels that are actually really rubbish but really profitable, we could say that, okay, this is a very profitable strategy in the short term, but the value of the brand is a critical success factor, and having the Marici brand attached to sub-quality products will ultimately rob us of a critical success factor, and therefore this strategy should not be undertaken. One real-world example that's sort of similar to this is a Cardiff-based company named Solar PV, who produced what were very affordable solar systems. However, in one instance, the inverter, which is a key component to one of these solar systems, caught fire, causing a devastating house fire in which thankfully no one was harmed, but the reputational damage to the company was immense, and ultimately they went bankrupt 6 months later. It's always worth bearing in mind, however, that there could be other factors preventing a company from completing their strategy. For example, it could be proposed that Marici Power purchased Trina Solar, who are the world's largest solar manufacturer. Excellent strategy. It would certainly increase the efficiency and reduce the price of the company's panels, whilst also giving it global scope. However, Trina are likely to cost billions, and as such this particular example would not be realistic because it's too expensive. Indeed, when thinking about Marici Power, expense is one key factor, as the company have very limited access to capital as well as very high debts, meaning that the company are unlikely to be able to develop large amounts of capital to undertake new strategy. As a final point on this page, it's also worth thinking that the unseen could work in a different way and could ask for your recommendation of a strategy, but then give you some new information. So, for example, we could say that our key strategy is improving the efficiency of solar panels. However, the unseen tells us that our existing polysilicon supplier has gone bust, and that our new supplier provides polysilicon of a significantly lower quality, meaning that the efficiency of our solar panels can't increase. In this case, although our strategy would be a good way to develop the business, we'd be forced to look at another possibility, and we could say that as our polysilicon supply is now of a lower quality, we would expect to pay a much lower price for it, and this in turn could make our panels much more affordable, improving their marketability and therefore possibly growing the business in this way. One way in which the unseen is very likely to do this is in terms of introducing new demands for capital or introducing new parameters which dictate certain strategies must be undertaken, whilst asking for your opinion of the ones that can be undertaken at the same time. So, let's consider the critical success factors from Marici Power with regards to this particular company. As we've already said, given the long-standing reputation of the company for quality, we need to continue to produce high-quality cells, and the primary way we measure quality in solar cells and solar panels is in the efficiency with which they convert sunlight to electricity. The next critical success factor for the company are considered to be low prices, and understanding why this is the case could take a little bit of explaining. Primarily, this is because the prices of solar panels have plummeted within the last decade. This is largely due to the eruption of solar as an industry within China, with Chinese manufacturers producing the world's cheapest solar panels. Now, the European Union and the USA in 2012 and 2013 introduced legislation preventing Chinese companies from importing solar panels at an incredibly low price. But in January 2016, the world's largest solar manufacturer, Trina Solar, managed to become exempt from these agreements. Ultimately, however, the overall industry trend is for this continued drop of prices, which, particularly when subsidies and tariffs are volatile at the moment, means that Marici Power have to produce cheap panels in order for them to be attractive to customers. We've already touched on ways in which the brand's reputation is incredibly important and that quality needs to be maintained to protect this, but this also has a number of other implications, including ethics, environmental credentials, as well as industry implications, including protecting the reputation of the company with suppliers by paying them on time and supplying other businesses that depend on us in a timely manner. We also know that Marici Power was founded from the research and development arm of a large oil company known as Salt Energy. This means that the company has a deep-seated history in research and development, placing it in a good position with regards to future innovation. We can also say that having up-to-date production facilities is definitely a critical success factor for Marici Energy, and this is because automation is widespread across the manufacture of solar panels, improving not only the reliability and technical capacity of the panels, but also the speed in which those panels are produced, reducing the overall cost for the customer. given that Marici Power do have one of the most advanced production facilities in the world, they're in a really good position for this critical success factor. However, there is therefore an obligation to continue spending on this, to continue ensuring it's up to date at all times in order to continue to be competitive. As an interesting aside, we also know that that production facility is in Freeland's capital, meaning that the property that it's housed in is potentially very valuable, and so in the future Marici Power may be thinking about relocating that facility to somewhere with cheaper labour markets, as other solar manufacturers such as BP Solar have done previously, and it's important that when they do that, they do not neglect the technical investment in this area. Speaking of areas, we've also already said that Marici Power are the largest manufacturer in Freeland, and that the pre-scene tells us that maintaining this is one of the key objectives of the company. This is because, as the largest manufacturer, they are naturally the first port of call for customers, and this has a good impact on their reputation, as well as bringing them a large amount of income. If another company grows to a size at which it's a really big domestic competitor, or even becomes the largest manufacturer itself, customers will then have another option with which to compare Marici Power, and it may also make that dominant brand, that name Marici, look less attractive. So if we think back to what we were talking about with regards to what we're going to accomplish during this video, we're looking at our future, and we've looked at the company's missions, we've looked at the critical success factors that we need to make sure are maintained in order to achieve those, and what we're now going to think about is who we're going to be affecting during that process, and that means looking at stakeholders. As many of you may be aware, stakeholders are everyone that are affected by something an organisation does. For example, and bear with me because this is slightly long-winded, in the solar industry there are a number of tariffs available when someone who owns solar panels sells energy back to the grid. They are essentially selling that energy for a profit. This money is funded by government, and the way the government raises the money necessary for subsidies is by imposing a price on everyone else's energy bills. That means for anyone watching this that doesn't have a solar panel, you're paying for those that do. And what this means is, if we're thinking about a stakeholder analysis, everyone that consumes energy and therefore pays energy bills is a stakeholder when we're thinking about Marici Power. So, with a stakeholder matrix that potentially includes absolutely everyone that consumes energy, we know that we're going to need to give this some relatively wide consideration. Indeed, having considered the needs of a wide range of shareholders, we need to keep these in mind as we set objectives, and this means that we balance objectives against the needs of our various shareholders, but also against the level of importance we ascribe to those shareholders. For example, whilst everyone that consumes energy is a stakeholder in Marici Power, we know that they're relatively unlikely to have a direct impact on the company and therefore have relatively little importance. We know that in the exam we're going to be given unseen material that's going to give us new strategies that are going to impact on our key stakeholders in different ways, and so it's important that we consider how they relate to key stakeholders, but also to all of the stakeholders in the business. So we need a model in order to be able to do that, and the one that's really the easiest is Mendelow's matrix. This is going to be applicable to a wide range of questions, and is actually a really brilliant way of gaining technical marks because of this. So, because it's an easy way of getting technical marks, always think about Mendelow's matrix, always try and work it into your exam, remembering that we need to think about stakeholders in a variety of different ways, as informed by the box that they go in when we think about them with regards to Mendelow's matrix. For those of you that are not sure what that means, let's go on to think about the matrix itself. As we can see here, when using Mendelow's matrix, we take a stakeholder and we think about how much power they have. be it low or high, and then think about the level of interest they have in the company, again, be it low or high. For example, if we think about a bank, they have potentially very high power over the company. They decide whether or not we can borrow money and therefore decide which strategies we're able to put in place. However, the bank has relatively little interest in the company, as all it cares about is whether or not the bank is going to be repaid. As such, we can say that the bank will have low interest in the company, but has high power, and that means we put it in the corresponding square. As we can see, the box in which we place a stakeholder gives us one of 4 possible outputs which the company needs to action. For example, given that the bank is able to decide whether or not we have access to funds, it's really important that we keep the bank satisfied. Whereas by comparison, if we've got the employee of a supplier which has low interest in our company and has relatively little power, as a consequence, they're of relatively little interest to us as a business. By using Mendelow's matrix, we can apply a really good stakeholder reasoning to anything we're given during the exam. For example, if we know that there's something that the bank will really like, but that employees of suppliers will be very, very angry about, we can say that as the bank has much higher power and we need to keep them satisfied, but we have minimal interest in the employees of suppliers, we would action the strategy which is most likely to keep the bank happy. For those of you watching the sample video on YouTube, I'm afraid that's where it ends. Thank you very much for joining me for the strategic analysis of Marici Power, and I really hope you found it useful. If you'd like to consider purchasing the full video, then please follow the link below. And during that video, we'll go on to consider all of the factors currently affecting Marici Power in order to make the best decision possible with regards to strategy, and you'll then also get my recommendations about the best possible strategy for Marici to use moving forwards without any additional unseen material. Once again, I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.